Hey guys and fellow whiskey lovers, I'm Leon and this is Malt Mariners, aka Whiskey Roads. As you know, this is a little sub-channel, the English sub-channel to the German bigger Malt Mariners whiskey channel. And here I will be sharing today I will be sharing some thoughts. This is not a tasting, not a review of a specific whiskey, but you will get some information about 6 single malt whiskies that me and a friend and 14 other single malt or whiskey lovers, whiskey fans did try blind in a tasting recently. Or I hosted the tasting. I knew what we were drinking. Sorry for the clutter. my desk is a bit cluttered. And yeah, the results of this blind tasting were astonishing. I was really surprised with how this went down, and I really want to share some of the results and some of my thoughts about the results with you guys. So let's get started. We had 6 whiskeys in there. We started with an Inchgower independent bottling from Signatory Vintage, a Scottish independent bottler in the Highlands. Inchgower, not a very well-known distillery. Then we had a Glengoin 21 years old from the Highlands. Basically, the distillery lies on the lowland and Highland border, but we get into that in a minute. Then we tried the Tom & Tool Cigar Malt. We had a 10-year-old Armorique from Brittany, from France. And then we had a 18-year-old Balblair from the Northern Highlands of Scotland. And we finished the tasting with a peated whiskey from the Waterford Distillery in Ireland. And that's about it. And I think I asked people to write down their ideas about how old the whiskey is, how much they would pay for the whiskey, or how much they think the whiskey is worth, and what they think, their personal rating. And I think these 3 factors, these 3 data points are really interesting. And I want to come to a little conclusion afterwards. So let's rush through these 6 whiskeys, and I'll tell you the most important facts about those whiskeys. The Signatory Vintage, I'm not going too deep into the whiskeys itself. If you're interested, you can obviously ask the internet about these whiskeys, but it's not a review specifically. Just the hard facts. Signatory Vintage is an independent bottling. It's a 13-year-old whiskey matured in hogsheads, in 2 hogsheads, so probably a bourbon cask matured whiskey. It's 13 years old, and it has 46% non-chill filtered, non-colored, and the price tag is 45 euros in Germany. The guys and girls in the tasting, it was a pretty good mix, different ages, different genders, different taste profiles, but there was a lot of people in there that I personally know from other tastings, and I know that they're quite experienced as well with whiskey, some of them. But yeah, it was a good mixed group. But yeah, obviously 14 people is not that much. But still, I think this is really interesting, and here we go. I asked them, how old do you think this whiskey is? And I will give you the average number, not what everybody said, but everybody together, and then I divided it to give you the average. And the average was 8 years, 9.8 years. So almost 10 years. The whiskey is 13 years old, so it was guessed a little bit younger than it actually is. It was guessed, the price point was actually spot on. They guessed it would be probably somewhere around 45 euros, and it exactly is 45 euros. As for the numbers, for the rating, I did like a rating system from 0 to 100 and divided them, I think, in 7 different categories, always like 15 points apart. And I counted always the medium, the middle. Like, for example, if people gave me a number, the area from 0 to 15, I would count that as 7.5 points, always take in the middle. I counted all the numbers together, all the points together, and the result would be 53 points out of 100 for this whiskey. So quite average. Not really a very good rating, but also not a terrible whiskey. It was basically rated average. Not really the biggest fan favorite. We go to Glengoin 21, and I think this is actually one of the first things that I personally feel is very, very interesting. And this single malt from Scotland was guessed or was estimated to be 11.8 years old. It is 21 years old. So obviously this whiskey could not perform in terms of, it could not show that it's an aged whiskey. It could not show it's an older whiskey. And usually Glengoin is a very smooth distillery, very, very, very subtle. It's a non-peated whiskey. And Glengoin is quite favored for creating smooth and elegant whiskies. I quite like the distillery. They do not color their whiskey. This is a whiskey at 43% ABV. And also the price point was estimated very low. They said, they guessed this whiskey would be worth 60 euros. And it is the current price point of this whiskey is 180 to 200 euros in Germany. I will not go into other prices in the UK and the US for this video, because I just want to give you the general impression that we had here in the tasting. For the points, for the liking of the whiskey, the Glengoin 21 ended up with 73 points out of 100. That's a solid rating, I would say. It's more or less like an easy sipper. It's like a good, nice whiskey, but not a phenomenal whiskey, but it's a nice whiskey. That was basically what people said. But it's obviously, for a whiskey that has a price point at almost 200 euros, I think that is a bit low. Then we look at the Tomentoul Cigar Malt. So this is a Speyside whiskey, and it is slightly peated. It's said that there are very old sherry casks in here, about like 20 years old sherry casks, mixed with younger sherry cask and mixed with a bit of a peat smoke Tomentoul. So it's a subtle, smoky Tomentoul whiskey. I personally quite like this whiskey, but it is quite expensive. It is the price point in Germany is 100 euros. And people guessed it to be 75 euros. So they put the price tag, what they personally felt is appropriate for this whiskey, quite lower than 100, but still not as far away as the Glengoin 21. As for the age, this whiskey is a no-age statement whiskey, so we don't really know the age, but it was guessed to be 10 years old. So that's actually quite solid. And for the rating, it was 69 points out of 100. So a solid taste rating, like a good sipper. After this, the fourth whiskey in the tasting, we had a bit of a break then, and then we tried the Armorique 10 years old. So this is a 10-year-old aged whiskey from France, from Brittany. If you've seen my whiskey, my video about French whiskey, you know that I'm quite fond of French whiskey, and that I personally think that French whiskey is a bit of a hidden gem right now, and it's really coming along in the category of European whiskey. If you want me to talk about other countries, then please let me know in the comments. Obviously, this channel is quite young, but maybe there are some people that are interested in that. I'm thinking about doing a video about English whiskey, for example, maybe German whiskey at a certain point. So there's a lot to talk about, obviously. But yeah, let's go back to Armorique 10 years old. It's quite unusual for a European whiskey to be to carry an age statement. Especially 10 years is actually quite old for a European whiskey, because most European distilleries do not really exist for such a long time, and Armorique is one of the few distilleries, or Warengem, that exists for a longer time, so they actually can afford to have age statements by this point. What I think is really interesting is that this whiskey was guessed to be 13 years old. So actually, people thought this was an older whiskey. What's really interesting as well is that 11 people out of 14 people thought that this was a Scotch whiskey. Nobody thought this is a European whiskey or a non-Scotch single malt. So it seems to be very close to Scotch whiskey, and it was estimated older than it actually is. That's a really good sign for the taste profile or the quality of the whiskey, if you want to look at it that way. My personal interpretation, yeah, I think I can say that. Price point as well, really interesting. This whiskey was rated to be 84 euros, and it's actually we pay 55 euros for this. So it was actually rated much higher, much more expensive than the whiskey actually is. And I think 55 euros is actually a really, really good price for a 10-year-old whiskey from Europe. Because other whiskies in Europe tend to have this price tag at 3 or 4 or 5-year-old. And I think a 10-year-old whiskey here has a really, really good price tag if it's like somewhere in the region of 55 euros. Also, the rating 79 points out of 100. So this is the highest rating so far, and it's a really solid rating. So this was rated a very good whiskey at that point. Then we went to Balblair. We went to the Northern Highlands, a distillery I really like, I love. I visited them several times. I bought a lot of whiskies over the years. And ever since, this distillery used to have vintage bottlings. So they used to tell you the year the whiskey was distilled and then the year the whiskey came into the bottle. And that was sort of their bottling. And then they went on to another year to another bottling. So the age was always implied in the vintage bottlings. And a couple of years ago, they switched from these vintages to classic age statements, which means now they tell you this whiskey is 12 years old, 15 years old, and 18 years old. That's the standard core range at the moment. I tried the 12, that's quite fine. I tried the 15, I really like that one, but it's quite expensive as well. And then I really wanted to try the 18-year-old and put it in front of other people without having the knowledge that this is an 18-year-old Scotch whiskey. Because usually, if you're approaching older whiskey, you are, I think it's quite normal that you will be a bit more receptive for the quality. You might be a bit intimidated by the age, or you might thinking, oh, this is really expensive, so it must be very good. So this is the reason why I really, really like blind tastings, especially to sort of test whiskies in terms of what they bring to the table and what they actually bring in the performance. Obviously, we have to mention when we talk about these things, it sounds like we're talking about a factual, like how can I say that? Like facts. Tasting whiskey is always something very, very, very individual, very subjective impressions. So it's not really something that can be pinned down. You should never forget that when we talk about whiskey. But that's the reason why I really like to share this data with you, because people here we have like a shared impression. Obviously, like it would be more solid. The numbers would be more solid if this was like 50 or 60 people. We have 14 people, but still, I think the numbers are interesting. So let's get back to Balblair 18. So this whiskey was rated to be 10 years old. So it's actually, it was estimated to be very much younger as well, as it actually is. It's 18 years old. The price point was guessed to be 87 euros, and in Germany we pay 120 to 135 euros for this. The rating overall was 74 out of 100 points, so that's a good whiskey rating in terms of, I like this whiskey, it's pretty good. But still, I think, especially when you look at the age as well, just like the Glengoin, this older Scotch whiskey could not really show its age. It could not convince people I am an older whiskey, so it definitely lacked some complexity, at least in this one specific moment. I might actually do a review of this whiskey in the future. I'm not really sure about this yet, but obviously I will not really do the same whiskey review on the German channel and on the English channel. This is an exception. I do this, I had the same video like this on the German channel. You guys probably will always get a bit more of the distilled information, no pun intended, that I do on the German channel. But I'm drawing obviously a lot of knowledge and input and content from the German channel here as well. So you guys actually can do a bit of cherry picking. So the last whiskey in the tasting, and this is also very interesting, was the Waterford Peated Ballybennan. So this is a single farm, single malt from the Waterford Distillery in Ireland. The Waterford Distillery was created by Mark Renier, a former employer, the former owner of Bruichladdich Distillery. I'm not sure if he was the owner. Yeah, I think he was the owner. He was definitely quite important in the role of creating the whiskies. So you could argue that this is actually a Scotch whiskey on Irish territory, but still, obviously, like officially, this still is an Irish whiskey, even though they write their whiskey without an E. So it is kind of like a hybrid between an Irish and a Scotch whiskey. What is really interesting is 8 people thought this was a Scotch whiskey. Proves my point. and 6 people thought this is from Islay. And when we asked about the age, this whiskey is 3 years and 8 months old, and people thought this was on the average 11 years old. So actually, some people even thought this was older than something between 14 and 18 years old. So this is quite astonishing. A Waterford peated got a rating of 85 points out of 100, so that's the highest rating of the tasting, and people thought this whiskey was worth 95 euros, and we pay 80 euros for this. So I personally think that that concludes the tasting in terms of the Waterford peated really won this battle in terms of the ratings. It has the highest rating. It was rated to be more expensive than it actually is, and it was rated much, much older than it actually is. So that brings us to the conclusion of the tasting, and I will show you guys the list of all the whiskies we had in terms of their ratings and their price point. And I personally think it is very interesting that I put 4 Scotch whiskies that are, 3 of them were over 100 euros worth in price, 4 Scotch whiskies against 2 non-Scotch whiskies with a much lower price point average than the Scotch whiskies. And the non-Scotch whiskies both won this tasting. So number 1 is Waterford with 85 points and 80 euros. Number 2 more certainly is the Armorique with 79 points and 55 euros. So these are actually the cheaper whiskies in this tasting. Obviously the Inchgauer didn't really float the boat of most of the people here. That was 45 euros and 53 points. It's the last one. But the next 3 places, I think that is actually quite interesting, because all the really expensive single malts from Scotland with a higher age or with some older parts in it, they did not really perform here. They did not really convince. And this brings us to the conclusion, and that brings us to my theory or my question. My theory here is, and I think it's not really a theory because it has been some sort of like a common, I wouldn't say common knowledge in the industry, but I think it's a quite not really a theory in terms of it's a hypothesis that Scotch whiskey has gotten worse over the last couple of years. It makes a lot of sense because the demand for Scotch whiskey has increased so much in the last couple of years. We've all seen the rise in the prices. We've all seen the explosion on the secondary market in the prices, especially with older single malt Scotch whiskies. And it makes a lot of sense that the only thing a distillery can actually do, they cannot redistill a whiskey and make it 20 years old tomorrow. So the only thing they can do is raise the price, or they can actually start bottling some casks that might have not met the quality criteria in the past. And maybe now they decide, well, we need a 21-year-old cask, so maybe we put one in here in the mix that is not as tasty as it used to be, that is not as well matured as it used to be. And that is basically my theory, and that is basically my question, because I think it is one thing that these bottlings are getting more expensive, but it's another thing if they actually get more expensive and at the same time lose quality. And I think then we really have a problem in Scotland. And this is not a Scotch bashing by no means. I was sort of raised in Scotland in terms of my whiskey passion. I worked at a distillery in Scotland. I lived in Scotland. I have many Scottish friends, and Scotch whiskey will always be my home turf in terms of whiskey. But obviously, I love to travel. I love to visit distilleries. I love to talk to people that make whiskey. And I feel that really Scotch whiskey in the last couple of years did lose some of their ground in terms of price value for money ratio, because we really see now that there's distilleries out there like Waregem, for example, that can create whiskey with an age statement, unchill filled, non-colored, with a really good price point that can actually compete with Scotch whiskey at a certain point. And especially if you compare it, that these whiskies are both cheaper than the Scotches we put in the tasting, and they're also better rated from the grading. That is quite astonishing. And that really got me thinking, because I know the Glengoin 21 for years. I really like this bottling. I always thought this is a really, really good whiskey. And I will definitely try it again. I will definitely give it a second chance to shine. But obviously, sometimes you only get one chance to shine. And this is it. And this was the stage we got him. Obviously, older whiskies might be actually opening up if you give them the time, with some time and maybe a drop of water. We all know this. A blind tasting and a whiskey tasting always is a bit of speed dating. You're running through different whiskies, and you don't really give them the time and the appreciation they might actually need. So all that in mind, keep that in mind when I talk about these things. I don't want to sound too dismissive. I don't want to sound too arrogant about these things. But I still think it is a very interesting result. And that is what I wanted to share with you guys. If you have any thoughts on this, please let me know in the comments below. If you think this is interesting, also let me know and share this with people that might actually be interested in this. Obviously, like I said before, this is a very young channel. I just started this, so I'm always happy to share my thoughts with you. And if you know anybody who might be interested in that as well, feel free to share that as well. So yeah, that's it. That is my result for this blind tasting, and I think this was really interesting. And yeah, let me know if you want to have like different videos of this kind, where I talk about general things in the whiskey industry, or my thoughts about specific issues or specific regions or specific whiskey types. I will definitely do some videos about these things in the future. But as you know how it is. I mean, my time is limited as well, and I'm also having the German channel, so I will pick some cherries now and then to put on the English channel, and I will definitely listen to comments and feedback, what you guys say and what you guys want to talk about, or what you want to see and what you want to hear. Right, that was the blind tasting. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really hope that you had some interesting impressions here, and I'm really curious what you think. What is your experience with older Scotch whisky? Do you think that aged whisky in Scotland has decreased in quality? Do you think that age statements in general in Scotland has decreased in quality? And what do you think is the solution for this? What do you think? Should the distilleries go to no age statements? Should they create something like the Tom and Toole Cigar Malt, where they mix younger and older whiskies together to create something completely new, but they also take off the age statement of the bottle? Or should they actually, I don't know, create the same kind of quality but make it even more expensive? I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I think we are really running into problems here, at least from the Scotch perspective. For us as customers, as long as we're open to open our eyes and look beyond the Scotch horizon, obviously we can always try other whiskies from other countries. There's French whiskies out there, there's Kavalant in Taiwan, there's English whiskey coming up, there's great whiskey all over the place. So there's a big variety to choose from. And I'm really curious if a lot of people that used to only drink Scotch single malt whiskey will switch to other whiskey countries in the future, or might actually at least dip a toe into the water in terms of what other countries have to offer in terms of quality and quality whiskey. Yes, that's my theory, that's my question, and now it's up to you guys, and we'll see you down the road.